Falling deeper, colder nights 난 너무 싫어. 기다리기에는 너무 길어.
Hey all, I'm back and today I'm coming at you with a video on how I learned Korean in 90 days. 안녕하세요. So I am half Korean, my mother is Korean and she doesn't speak Korean around me. My whole life she spoke English to me. She moved from Seoul to the US when she was 2 years old, so she's very, very Americanized and my whole family is. So I never really grew up listening to a lot of Korean. The only thing was when I would go to my grandparents' house, they only speak Korean. So I knew very basic words, but I in no way could understand majority of things that they were saying other than counting from 1 to 10 and probably cursing in Korean. So I challenged myself last year to start learning Korean. I have a video on how I learned the alphabet Hangul very quickly, and that is super easy to do. If you're trying to learn an Asian language, I'd say start with Korean. It's one of the easiest. There's about 26 letters in the alphabet, so it's kind of like the English language. Like there's not that many letters to get accustomed to, like characters and all the different Chinese languages as well. So it's a little bit easier than also learning Japanese and the many other Asian languages that there are. So the reason why this video is called How I Learned Korean in 90 Days is because I started a program called 90 Day Korean. I have tried other free programs and let me just say they didn't work for me. For some people who are really diligent in their practice and are constantly reminding themselves that they need to study, that might work for them. But for me, I needed a structured plan for myself and also having a Korean coach to tell me that I have new practice lessons available and I can submit my homework to for corrections. The program that I use is 90 Day Korean. I will put a screenshot of what they are and some other video clips of me working on their stuff, but this video is not sponsored by them at all. I just really like their content on there. I think it's great because they have vocabulary every single week and it's challenging. It's a lot of vocabulary and I feel like I'm learning like 50 to 100 words a week, and I'm also learning key grammar. So I think some of the other programs that I have done, like Talk to Me in Korean, those programs, they're great, but I felt like I was learning way too granular of things. So the concepts that I was learning were not going to help me understand Korean that people are using every day in their vernacular. A lot of what I was learning was like the most formal type of way of speaking in Korean, which just isn't useful if you're just trying to travel to Korea and understand what people are saying that are nearby you and you're trying to get around. You don't want to learn how to fully speak the most formal way because that is not how everyone is talking all the time. 90 Day Korean really does a great job in saying, okay, this is the formal way of saying it, but this is the way that you're most likely going to be using it when you're talking to people. And so I'm going to go through my little routine of what I do every day and every week and how I keep myself on track. So I still have the same little notebook called Learning Korean, and what I do is every day, whenever I have an hour, I set aside time to go on the 90 Day Korean website. I go on the course that I am currently on, and I probably do 1 to 3 lessons depending on what my brain can kind of wrap around. I try to switch off between doing grammar and vocabulary every day, and then when I have free time, doing vocabulary and just practicing on my own. But there's so much vocabulary that it's really hard to just like learn it all in one day and then have it memorized. So what I do is in my notebook, I just write down all of the lessons and I take notes about any important grammar rules that I see and things that I want to remember. So last time was who, what, where, when, why. So when I was going through that, I was writing out different sentences, incorporating that language. As you can see here, it's not the prettiest, but that is kind of what I do. And then I look at the vocabulary that they have and I create a Quizlet every week and I build on to the same Quizlet for the same first section. So if I'm on section 1.5, I'll add like 1.3, 1.4, 1.5 all to the same lesson in Quizlet because I want to constantly be exposed to even my old vocabulary words from the week before, and that's been really helpful in reinforcing language for myself. And instead of just going on my phone and going on Instagram whenever I am bored and waiting in line for something, I will go onto my Quizlet and start practicing Korean. So that is what I do to make sure that I am practicing every day. And then on top of this, because I now live in San Francisco and I'm not always home and I can't really speak Korean with people, I always have a Korean show that I'm watching. So I currently am watching Cinderella and the Four Knights. I really, really like that. If you're into Korean dramas, you should totally watch it. It's not as dramatic as some of the other ones, and I'm not super into the really, really dramatic ones that are over the top. But I do really like that one. And the reason why I think listening to these shows and watching them is really important is because you're seeing the English translation while hearing the Korean words, so you can reinforce what you learned. So for example, I learned what college or university is, and that's 대학교. So when I heard the people in the Korean show using that word, they say it really, really fast, whereas like when I was learning it was like 대학교. But then when I see them say it on screen, and they say it super fast and I can barely understand it, but because they're saying it so many times in the show and I've already learned the word, I'm finally catching on to the language, which is really, really important, I think, versus just studying and writing and typing by yourself. You need to hear people communicating it so that you know the way that it is going to be used when people are usually speaking. The other reason why I like these Korean dramas is because you're seeing how people talk more in their vernacular rather than, once again, the formal language. So as mentioned, in the Korean language, there's so many different levels of formalities, and it can be very, very difficult to understand them all. And sometimes it's great because in these Korean dramas, people will adjust the way that they speak depending on who they're talking to, and you can catch on to their verb endings and how they're communicating differently depending on who they're talking to and adjusting their levels of formalities. So that is why I also think that Korean dramas are very, very helpful. On the side, what I do when I have time as a challenge is I like listening to BTS. I'm a big, big BTS stan, and I will look up some of my favorite songs and then begin translating them. And that's really fun because if you want to understand the language that you're listening to in that, for that song, it's really great because I can actually understand what they're saying and not just like the beat of the music and the way that the words sound. And I can actually like create a story and a picture of what the artists are communicating in their language. So that is kind of my daily routine. I try to watch an episode of a Korean drama every day, and I also try to practice Korean every day. If I'm lazy and I don't want to do a grammar lesson, I will just do an hour of vocabulary. And let me tell you, it is exhausting, but as someone who is post-grad and is not studying for anything, I think it's also been great in just keeping my mind fresh. As much as doing design is work and challenging, it's not the same thing as memorizing and studying something. And that is why I really think learning a new language is awesome for reminding you that you can still study things and learn and adapt. And learning language is just something that can be so helpful in any type of environment. And yeah, I'm realizing how much I love linguistics and I love learning a language, and I would love to learn other languages. I learned Spanish in high school and a little bit in college, so I would love to continue that or learn any Romance languages. But yeah, I hope that that was helpful. This is how I've been consistent in understanding my Korean, and even though I can barely form a bunch of sentences, if I were to go to Korea right now, I could probably get by because I know a lot of the small words that you need to know to get around, like stop, like go, like different verbs, like to leave or eating or like taking a photo, just little things like that. If I were to travel, I know I could be a lot more confident going because of this program. And the reason why I'm also pitching the 90-day Korean program is because you're not going to learn in a week. Like, that's just impossible. You can study like 500 vocabulary words, and I think that that would still be very helpful if you were to go to Korea. But 90 days is an ample amount of time to get your feet wet with the language and be somewhat familiar with it, where if you were to go to a place, you'd understand what people are saying and kind of be able to like eavesdrop and understand what they're talking about. So I hope that this video was useful for you, and let me know if you want me to do more Korean videos. I'd love to do a little study with me's just for my kind of progress and to see how I'm doing. Maybe do a video like trying to speak in Korean. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed that, please give it a thumbs up, and I will see you guys sooner or later. Cheers!
can pay hourly. We can carpool, I can drive. Listening to Jackson 5. We can make it, we'll survive. Though we might be